At my father's retirement party, I watched him raise his glass with that smug smile he wore every time the spotlight was on him. He announced that my brother Rowan would inherit everything. The $95 million company, the mansion overlooking the coast, and even the private jet that symbolized our family's wealth. The crowd cheered and clapped like they were witnessing a royal coronation. I sat there in silence, already used to being invisible in my own family. Then he turned his eyes toward me. His voice dropped lower, sharper the way he spoke when he wanted his words to cut. He said, "Darren, you get nothing. You were never supposed to be born. I wish you had died right after you were born." The room fell silent for a split second before erupting into laughter. Guests laughed at me as if my father's cruelty was some kind of joke. Hello, friends. Before we dive into today's story, please help me grow this channel by subscribing, sharing this video with others, and don't forget to hit that like button. Now, let's get started with our story. My brother Rowan leaned back in his chair, grinning like it was the funniest thing he had ever heard. Even my mother, Era, didn't speak. She just lowered her gaze to her glass of wine. Too afraid or too unwilling to stop him. Humiliated, I pushed back my chair and stood to leave. Every step toward the door felt heavier than the last, the sound of laughter echoing in my ears. Just as I reached the edge of the room, I felt a hand slip something into mine. I looked down. It was a sealed envelope. The family lawyer. My Uncle Grant leaned close and whispered, "Open this when you're ready." Tore it open with shaking hands. The very first words on the page made my father's face turn white. He dropped his glass, and for the first time in my life I saw fear in his eyes. The night of my father's retirement party was not just a celebration, it was a carefully staged performance meant to show the world the power, wealth, and control of Victor Holt. The ballroom, inside his mansion, had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. Crystal chandeliers glowed above polished marble floors. String quartet played softly in the corner, while servers carried trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The walls were lined with framed photographs of my father standing beside governors, CEOs, and foreign dignitaries, as though he needed to remind everyone that he had built his empire with his bare hands and iron will. To the guests, it was a glamorous evening. To me, it felt like I had walked into a room built to remind me of how small I was. I stood near the back at first, watching people I barely knew congratulate my brother, Rowan, even before my father had officially announced anything. Rowan wore his usual tailored suit, standing tall with that easy confidence he had carried since childhood. People gravitated to him the way iron filings cling to a magnet. He knew how to laugh at the right time, how to shake hands firmly, how to look important even when he said nothing. I could see how proud my father was as he watched Rowan from across the room. Victor Holt was a man who thrived on strength and admiration. At 67, he still carried himself like a general who never lost a battle. His hair had gone gray, but his posture never faltered. People respected him, feared him even, and he enjoyed that more than any drink or gift. When my father looked at Rowan, his chest lifted with pride. When his eyes slid to me, they carried something colder. I was the shadow he tried to ignore, the reminder of a mistake he had admitted to me more than once. He had told me as a boy that I was never supposed to be born, that my existence had ruined his plans for the perfect family. He said it so often that part of me began to believe it. My mother, Ira, floated through the party with a graceful smile, but her silence had always been her armor. She was elegant, draped in a long gown with pearls around her neck, greeting guests with gentle nods. To outsiders, she appeared to be the dignified matriarch of a powerful family, but to me, she was a woman who had long ago chosen quiet compliance over confrontation. She loved me in private, I think, but in public she kept her head down, unwilling to challenge my father's harsh words. As I stood near the dessert table, my Uncle Grant found me. He was my father's older brother and the family lawyer, a man with tired eyes and a voice that carried authority without force. Unlike my father, he had never treated me like a burden. He squeezed my shoulder and said, "You holding up, Darren?" I gave him a half smile and shrugged. I had learned long ago not to expect much from nights like these. Growing up in the Holt family meant living under a hierarchy set in stone. Rowan was the crown jewel. Groomed from birth to take over the company, I was the unwanted second son, told repeatedly to be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. Rowan excelled in sports, business courses, and every social event. My father rewarded him with new cars, vacations, and endless praise. I preferred reading, music, and volunteering at shelters which my father dismissed as wasted time. He called me soft. He told me the world would eat me alive if I did not toughen up. That night at the party, I tried to keep my expectations low. I knew the evening was about Rowan. Still, some small, stubborn part of me wondered if my father might acknowledge me in some way, even if it was minor. Maybe a word of encouragement, a token gesture, anything to prove I was not completely invisible. The longer the evening went on, the more I realized that hope was foolish. Guests lined up to shake Rowan's hand, as though he were already the new king. Old friends of my father told stories about Rowan's leadership, his discipline, his future. No one asked me a single question. I was background noise. The spare son lingering near the buffet, Rowan noticed. Of course, he never missed a chance to remind me of my place. At one point, he leaned close, his grin wide enough for the cameras nearby to capture. "Relax, Darren," he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Maybe Dad will leave you the fishing cabin, that way you can live like a hermit and play your guitar." A few of his friends laughed at the joke, and I forced a smile so the sting would not show. That was the pattern of my life. Rowan's jabs, my silence, my father's cold dismissal, my quiet endurance, my mother's downward glance, my acceptance of it. I had learned to survive in the cracks of this family's towering walls. But survival does not mean belonging. And I knew deep down that I did not belong in this room, filled with people celebrating a future I had no part in. As the orchestra shifted into a louder melody and my father began to step toward the center stage with his glass raised, I felt my chest tighten. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. My father was about to make it official. He was going to crown Rowan the heir of the empire while the world watched. And me? I was about to be reminded again in front of everyone that I was nothing more than an accident who had wandered into the wrong story. The moment came with the clink of my father's glass against the microphone. The room hushed. Instantly, that was the kind of presence Victor Holt commanded. He did not have to demand. Silence. It happened naturally, like the air itself paused to listen. Standing tall at the center of the ballroom with the chandelier light catching the silver in his hair, he looked every bit the titan he believed himself to be. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady and filled with authority, "we are not only celebrating my retirement, we are celebrating the legacy of Holt Enterprises. What began as a small venture has become a global company worth $95 million, and this," he gestured toward the crowd, "is the future of the empire I built." The audience erupted in cheers. I watched their faces light up, watched them raise their glasses in admiration. My father thrived on that attention. He scanned the room with satisfaction, then turned toward Rowan, who stood near the stage with his chin high and his chest puffed out. "My eldest son, Rowan," my father said, his voice warming with pride, "is the man I trust to carry this company forward. He has the strength, the discipline, and the intelligence to expand our name and protect everything we've built. Tonight I hand him the keys to the kingdom. The company is his, the mansion is his, and even the private jet is his. Rowan Holt is the future." Applause thundered across the ballroom. Some people stood to clap harder. Rowan grinned broadly, shaking hands as if he had already signed the deal of his life. He basked in the approval, nodding at people he barely knew. My father extended his hand to him, and Rowan clasped it firmly while photographers rushed forward to capture the moment. Sat frozen in my chair. None of this surprised me. Yet it still cut deeper than I expected. My chest burned as I watched father and son stand shoulder to shoulder, basking in their moment of triumph. Then my father's eyes turned toward me. The warmth in his voice evaporated. His expression hardened, and for a second the entire room seemed to lean forward, sensing something cruel about to happen. "And as for my other son, Darren," he said, pausing deliberately, letting the silence grow heavy, "you get nothing." The words landed like a hammer, Conversation stopped. Glasses froze midair, my father's voice, sharpened into a blade. You were never supposed to be born. I wish you had died right after you were born. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then laughter broke out, scattered at first, then swelling into a cruel chorus. People chuckled awkwardly, some clapping as if my father's viciousness were part of a rehearsed joke. Rowan's laughter rang the loudest, echoing above the others, feeding on my humiliation. I could not breathe. Heat flooded my face. My ears rang and I felt the weight of every mocking glance press against me. My mother lowered her eyes to her glass, pretending she had not heard the words, pretending I was not her son at all. I wanted to speak, to shout, to tell my father that his cruelty had cut me deeper than any absence of inheritance ever could. But my throat locked tight. My entire body felt paralyzed, as if chained by the years of insults and dismissals I had endured. I had been conditioned into silence, and in that moment, silence felt like my only weapon against breaking down in front of them all. I pushed back my chair and stood. The sound of it scraping across the marble floor drew even more eyes to me. My legs felt heavy as I walked toward the exit. Laughter trailed me like a cloud of smoke. Rowan's voice followed with a sneer. Don't be so sensitive, little brother. Maybe Dad will let you keep your guitar. More laughter followed, stabbing at my back. I kept my head down, determined to leave with what little dignity I could salvage. Every step felt like proof that I did not belong in this family, in this empire, in this story. Just as I reached the edge of the ballroom, I felt a hand press something into mine. I looked down and saw a sealed envelope. My Uncle Grant stood beside me, his expression grave and unreadable. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. Don't walk away yet, he whispered. This is from someone who wanted you to know the truth. Confusion mixed with my shame. My hands trembled as I held the envelope. For a moment I considered slipping it into my pocket and walking out. But something in Grant's eyes told me this was more than a token gesture. It mattered. It was important. Behind me I could still hear the laughter. My father's voice rose again as he toasted Rowan, moving on as though I had never existed. My humiliation hung in the air like smoke, but now in my hand I held something heavier, something that might hold answers I had never dared to ask. I turned slightly, looking back at the stage where my father stood tall and proud, still reveling in the power of his words. For years I had endured his cruelty in silence. For years I had accepted the role of the unwanted son. But now, for the first time, I held something that might challenge him. I slid my finger under the seal, my pulse pounding. I decided that if I was going to be humiliated, I would not leave the room quietly. If this envelope had the power my uncle suggested, I would open it right there in front of everyone. That decision, born from anger and pain, would turn the night upside down and reveal a truth that none of them expected. The envelope felt heavier than it should have. My fingers shook as I held it, the gold seal glinting under the chandelier light. Around me the party continued as though nothing had happened, as though my father's public humiliation of me had been part of the entertainment. Guests clinked glasses. Laughter drifted across the room and the string quartet picked up again. My brother basked in the glow of his new crown, smiling and shaking hands, while my father accepted congratulations like a king bestowing favor. I stood at the edge of the ballroom with the envelope pressed against my palm, trying to decide whether to open it or walk away. My Uncle Grant's words echoed in my mind. Don't walk away yet. This is from someone who wanted you to know the truth. For so long I had been the one who stayed silent. When my father insulted me, I swallowed it. When Rowan mocked me, I ignored it. When my mother looked away, I told myself I did not need her defense. But standing there with that envelope, I felt a surge of something different. Rage, yes. Humiliation, yes. But also a small spark of defiance that had been buried inside me for years. I turned back toward the room. My father was still speaking, recounting stories about Rowan's supposed brilliance, as though the night were a coronation. Every word felt like another brick in the wall he had built between me and the rest of the family. My brother's grin widened with every compliment. Their world was whole and untouchable, and I was the outcast, the mistake, The invisible son. But not anymore. I walked back to my seat, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. A few heads turned as I returned to the table. Some guests smirked as though amused that I had not slunk away entirely. Rowan leaned toward me, whispering just loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Couldn't stay away, huh? Maybe Dad will let you sweep the hangar where the jet is parked." His friends laughed again, eager to follow his lead. This time I did not look away. I met his eyes and held them. My silence was no longer submission. It was preparation. I placed the envelope flat on the table in front of me. My mother glanced at it briefly before lowering her gaze again, unwilling to intervene. My father noticed the gesture and sneered from the stage. "What is that, Darren? A sympathy card?" His laughter drew a ripple of chuckles from the crowd. I ignored him. My hand steadied as I broke the seal. The paper tore cleanly, the sound sharp in the quiet corner of the table. I slid out a folded letter, written on thick stationery, with my grandfather's name embossed at the top. Behind it were several official documents stamped with seals I did not yet understand. My heart pounded as I opened the letter. My eyes scanned the first line and something inside me shifted. The words were not cruel. They were not dismissive. They were filled with intent. They were directed to me. Not Rowan, not my father, but me. I rose to my feet, the letter trembling in my hand. Conversations around me began to fade. People noticed my posture, my expression, the fact that I had not left after all. My father's voice faltered mid-sentence as he realized I was not disappearing quietly. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his tone sharp, his confidence cracking ever so slightly. I lifted the letter high enough for the nearest tables to see. "I am reading this aloud," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "Since you wanted to make a spectacle of me tonight, let's make sure the truth is heard too." The guests grew quiet. Even the quartet stopped playing. Rowan laughed nervously and muttered, "He is trying to make a scene." But the silence of the room betrayed him. People wanted to know what was written on that paper. I unfolded the letter fully and cleared my throat. My eyes caught the first line again and I spoke it aloud. "To my grandson, Darren Holt." Gasps rippled through the audience. My father's face paled. Rowan's smirk faltered. I continued, my voice steady, despite the storm inside me. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone and my wishes have been delayed or hidden. I built Holt Enterprises with the hope that one day it would be guided by the right hands, not the strongest voice, not the loudest man, but the one with integrity. That man is you, Darren." The ballroom erupted in murmurs. My father stepped forward quickly, his hand raised. "Enough. Sit down." But I did not stop. "This letter is accompanied by legal documents transferring controlling shares of Holt Enterprises to me. My grandfather made it clear he wanted me, not Rowan, not Victor, to inherit the company. He wrote this so no one could twist the truth." The weight of the room shifted. Guests whispered, heads turned, and I could feel eyes darting between me, my father, and Rowan. For the first time, I was not the invisible son. I was the center. My father's glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sound rang out like a gunshot. His face drained of color. He looked at the documents in my hand with something I had never seen in him before. Fear. My Uncle Grant stepped forward, his voice firm and authoritative. "These are binding documents. Victor, you know this as well as I do." Edmund Holt made his wishes perfectly clear. I held the letter high. My voice cut through the silence. "For years you told me I was nothing. Tonight, we will see who was telling the truth." The ballroom froze after my uncle's declaration. The only sound was the dripping of champagne from the broken glass my father had dropped onto the marble floor. For the first time in my life, Victor Holt did not look untouchable. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and his chest rose and fell too quickly. The mask of control he had worn for decades cracked in front of hundreds of people. Rowan broke the silence with a bark of laughter that sounded forced. He stepped closer to me, jabbing a finger toward the documents. "This is a trick. Some old piece of paper dredged up to humiliate us." Dad, tell them it means nothing. My father tried to speak, but his voice caught. His authority slipped like water through his fingers. These are lies, he said, though the tremor in his tone betrayed him. Uncle Grant did not flinch. He held his head high, pulling out another document from his briefcase. This is a notarized directive from Edmund Holt, witnessed by myself and 2 independent parties. The controlling shares of Holt Enterprises are to be transferred to Darren Holt upon Victor Holt's retirement. Not Rowan, not Victor. Darren. Gasps erupted across the room. The guests, who had once laughed at my humiliation, now leaned forward with wide eyes, whispering to one another. The balance of the night shifted. I was no longer the boy mocked at his father's table. I was the man standing with the weight of the Holt legacy in his hands. Rowan's face turned red as he snatched at the papers. This is fraud. You cannot just hand him everything when I have spent my entire life preparing for this company. Everyone here knows I am the rightful heir. I pulled the documents back before he could touch them. Preparing to inherit something does not mean you deserve it. Grandfather saw through your arrogance. He knew who you were, and he chose me. The words cut him, and his smile collapsed into a scowl. His voice rose, desperate now. This is insane. He is a nobody. He hides in his room with his books and his music while I build a future for this company. He is soft. He is weak. He is unfit to run anything. Before I could respond, Grant's voice sliced through the tension. You can argue opinions all night, Rowan, but the law is not built on opinions. It is built on documents like these. Edmund Holt's decision is final and binding. My father staggered back, clutching the edge of the podium for support. His eyes darted between the papers and me and then to the faces of his guests. The mighty Victor Holt, who had built his life on power and pride, looked cornered. I had never seen him look small, but in that moment he did. I turned back to the letter in my hand and raised my voice so the entire room could hear. My grandfather wrote, "Do not let cruelty define you as it has defined your father. The empire I built was meant to lift people, not to crush them. I give it to you. Darren, because you have compassion, do not squander it." The words echoed off the high ceilings. People murmured in disbelief. Some nodded as if the letter finally explained what they had always suspected about Victor's ruthless ways. Others stared at me with new recognition, as though seeing me for the first time. Victor finally erupted, his voice cracking under the strain. I built this empire. My sweat, my blood, my sacrifices, and you mean to hand it all to him? A boy who never wanted it, a mistake that should not exist. His voice rose to a shout, spittle flying as he pointed at me. I will not let this happen. But the power he once held was gone. The guests no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked at him with fear, with pity, with judgment. His ranting only exposed the bitterness he had hidden for years. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. You cannot stop it. Grandfather made sure of that. You can call me weak. You can call me a mistake. But tonight, in front of everyone you wanted to impress, the truth stands taller than you do. You never had the final word. He did. Rowan lunged toward me, but 2 of my father's associates pulled him back, their faces pale. They had seen enough to know where the tide was turning. The room was silent again as I placed the documents back into the envelope and held it tightly against my chest. For the first time, I felt the weight of belonging, not because I had taken something from Rowan or silenced my father, but because someone who mattered had believed in me enough to entrust me with everything. Victor slumped into a chair, his hands covering his face. The man who once commanded boardrooms, who had cowed governors and businessmen, sat broken in front of his empire. The glass shards at his feet seemed to reflect the truth. His reign had ended, not with triumph, but with humiliation. I looked out at the guests, their eyes fixed on me. They were waiting for me to speak, waiting for me to step into the role my grandfather had given me. My voice did not shake this time. My name is Darren Holt. I am the heir to Holt Enterprises, and from this night forward, things will change. The declaration sent a ripple through the room. Some clapped hesitantly, others whispered, but all of them understood that the world they had walked into was not the one they would walk out of. I stood tall, my father broken beside me, my brother seething with rage, and my mother watching silently with tears in her eyes. The climax of my life had arrived, and it was not humiliation that defined me anymore. It was truth. The room never returned to the way it had been before I opened the envelope. The laughter that once rang so loud had vanished in tow. Its place was a stunned silence broken only by the sound of whispers and shifting feet. Guests who had cheered for Rowan and toasted my father now avoided their eyes, uncertain where their loyalty should fall. My father sat slumped in his chair, staring at the broken glass on the floor as though he could piece it back together with sheer will. For decades he had lived as though power was a weapon he could wield against anyone who challenged him. Tonight, that weapon had been stripped away. He was no longer the man commanding the room. He was a figure, crumbling under the weight of a truth he had spent years hiding. Rowan paced angrily, red-faced and seething, his fists clenched and unclenched as though he was looking for something to smash. But his eyes darted around the room and caught the stares of men and women who had once praised him. They no longer saw the heir. They saw the son who had been elevated by lies. His voice rose in protest, sharp and desperate. "This cannot be the end. I am the one who earned it." But the more he spoke, the more his words rang hollow. My mother, Era, finally rose from her chair. For years she had been silent, watching conflict pass over her like storms she could not stop. She moved toward me, her eyes shimmering with tears. She took my hand in both of hers and whispered so quietly I almost did not hear. "Your grandfather was right about you." Her words were simple, but they reached deeper than any applause. For the first time in years, I felt her choose me. Guests began to leave in clusters. The glamour of the evening shattered. The same people who had laughed at my humiliation now shook my hand and muttered, "Congratulations," eager to align themselves with the man holding the future of Holt Enterprises. He accepted their words, but did not let them anchor themselves in me. I had lived too long, knowing how quickly praise could turn into ridicule. As the ballroom emptied, I stood by the stage, still holding my grandfather's letter, read his words again in silence. They were not just about money or property. They were about a legacy meant to be used differently. He had not chosen me because I was loud or powerful. He had chosen me because I cared, because I had compassion. He had seen something my father refused to acknowledge. I realized then that this night was not about proving my father wrong. It was about proving to myself that I was never the mistake he claimed I was. For years I had lived as though my existence was a burden. Tonight the truth had given me something he could never take away. Belonging. Victor did not speak again that evening. He sat in silence, watching as Rowan stormed out, his voice echoing curses down the hallway. My mother stayed by my side, quiet but present. Uncle Grant placed a steady hand on my shoulder and said, "It is time you stepped into what was always meant for you." I nodded, though I knew the path ahead would not be easy. Taking control of Holt Enterprises would mean challenges I had never prepared for. There would be resistance, there would be doubt, and there would be eyes waiting for me to fail. But I also knew I would not lead the way my father had. The empire would not be built on fear and cruelty. It would be built on something stronger: integrity. The lesson of that night was not just about inheritance, it was about truth. People can try to bury it, twist it, or laugh in its face, but truth has a way of rising when the moment demands it. My father had spent years convincing me that I was nothing. My grandfather's words reminded me that I was always something. And in that reminder, I found the strength to claim my place. So when I tell this story now, I tell it not just as a son who was humiliated and then vindicated. I tell it as a man who learned that no amount of cruelty can erase your worth when you are grounded in truth. And if you are listening to this, remember that lesson. You may feel small in the shadow of others. You may be told you do not belong. But your worth is not defined by their voices. It is defined by who you are when the truth finally comes to light. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it connected with you, if it made you think, or if it stirred something inside you, do me a favor. Like this video to help it reach more people. Share it with someone who might need to hear this kind of story. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your experiences, or how you would have reacted if you were in my shoes. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story we bring to life. Your support means more than you know, and it is what allows stories like this one to keep being told.